In the movie Groundhog Day, Bill Murray plays the main character, weatherman Phil Connors. His character relives February 2nd, Groundhog Day, over and over again in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, where the main festival takes place. Some speculate Phil relived the same day for 3 decades. How does Phil deal with the monotonous prison of living the same day over and over? Nothing he does from one day to the next seems to matter. Phil tries all kinds of things to find some kind of meaning. Phil indulges in every kind of pleasure and denies himself nothing. If it feels good, he does it. He stuffs himself with food, punches out a guy who annoys him, and seduces women into bed with him. That doesn't satisfy, so Phil turns to greed. He robs an armored car and buys all the clothes he always wanted. He tries to live a life he could not before. Next, Phil turns to despair. Since he cannot escape from the curse, Phil takes his life multiple times, but wakes up again every time, right back in Punxsutawney. Then Phil turns to knowledge. He tries to learn and better himself. He takes up piano, ice sculpting, French poetry, and more to become an educated, well-rounded man. Phil does not wake up on February 3rd until he finally reaches contentment in his current circumstance. Only then is his curse lifted. The last time he relives February 2nd, he looks into the eyes of a woman he has fallen in love with, Rita, and he says, "I don't know what will happen tomorrow. All I know is I'm happy right now." Matt Chandler observed, "Life is more like Groundhog Day than we want to admit." To prove his point, he asks what a person will do on Monday and describes a scenario. You get up, you shower, you eat breakfast, you go to work, you come home, da-da-da-da-da. And then he says, "Guess what you will do on Tuesday?" And for most people, it's a repeat of Monday. Many people, perhaps most, are stuck in a rut, going through the motions, trying to figure out what all of this means. There is a monotonous drudgery to life. We are stuck in a monotonous prison where nothing we do really changes anything, and the only way to live a meaningful life in this meaningless existence is to find satisfaction and contentment in what God has given us. A young woman was called the smartest person in the world. She had successfully taken a variety of college entrance exams without missing a single question. She was asked by a reporter, "What is the purpose of life?" Her answer reflected the struggle of generations. She said, "I don't have a clue." She was smart, but she didn't know the purpose of life. In the book of Ecclesiastes, we are introduced to a man who could identify with the Phil of Groundhog Day, with the smartest person on the planet, and with the many people who find themselves trying to find the meaning of life. Solomon, the author of Ecclesiastes, faced the monotony of life and tried to find meaning in all kinds of things, but he found all of them, to be meaningless. He calls himself a teacher or a preacher. The Hebrew word denotes the leader of a congregation. He was the teacher of Israel. Following his father David, Solomon became the king of Israel. God asked Solomon what he wanted, and he asked for wisdom. God granted Solomon's request, and he used his great wisdom to rule the kingdom. But the wisest man in the ancient world became a greedy, lustful, power-hungry, idolatrous fool. He disobeyed Deuteronomy chapter 17 and accumulated possessions as well as women for himself. The foreign women he married pulled his heart away from God to false gods. Solomon did not deny himself anything he wanted. As a result, he ruined his kingdom, and God told him that following his death, his kingdom would be divided during his son's reign. Now, throughout much of Solomon's life, he tried to find himself. But by his own admission, he looked in all the wrong places. He explored the benefits of wisdom, pleasure, sex, work, power, possessions. His explorations are an important theme throughout the book. He had tried everything and found nothing. He had experienced all that life had to offer and came up empty. In Ecclesiastes, Solomon presents his own case history as an old man looking back on life from very near its end and offering the fruits of his experience. Picture him as you read the book of Ecclesiastes. He is old, reflective, sadder but wiser, and concerned about generations to come. This morning we will look at Solomon's introduction to his book. Ecclesiastes, the first chapter, is basically setting the stage for the remainder of the things that Solomon will write. And he first points out that everything is meaningless because all of our activity is pointless. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. He is the teacher of Israel. The son of David, of course, he was king. Verse 2, meaningless, says the teacher, utter meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Your translation may say vanity, futility. The meaning would also be emptiness. Why does he start with such a negative attitude about life? Notice some things that he says about what he has found about life. What does man gain from all his labor, at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already, long ago. It was here before our time. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Meaningless, meaningless. Having that word repeated twice basically says this is as meaningless as possible. And this phrase is used 30 times, some 30 times in Ecclesiastes. Its root comes from the word breath or vapor. Our breath in cold weather comes out, we can see it, but only for a moment. The vapor on the grass only lasts for a little while in the morning. And so Solomon's conclusion after looking at life is it's really without meaning. It's really empty. In verse 3, he uses the phrase, under the sun. That's a very important phrase in understanding Ecclesiastes. It's used about 30 times in the book. Under the sun basically means in this life. Solomon is saying, in this life, just from my observation, all is emptiness. This book has a powerful message for all who try to find happiness in the things of this life. The book hints that we must look beyond this life to find happiness. There's another very important word used in the book some 40 times, and that word is God. We must look beyond the sun to God. Then life will make sense. I'm getting a little ahead in Ecclesiastes, but that's where we're going. As we look at Solomon's observations about life, we see Solomon looking at the question of the meaning of life from an earthly perspective. He basically says, if this world is all there is, if there is no God, no afterlife, no final judgment, then indeed everything is meaningless. Solomon's point is that if this life is all there is, then there really is no profit to your life. The poem in verses 4 through 11 points to the repetitive cycles in nature to prove the point that nothing is gained from all of our activity. We have the sun coming up, going down. We have the waters. They go down to the ocean. The ocean never gets full or overflows. All of this thing he observes is just a repetition. And so in verse 8 he says, all things are wearisome. The behaviors that parallel the sun, wind, and sea. This is all wearisome. He basically says we can't say enough, we can't see enough, we can't hear enough. Verse 9 phrase of nothing new under the sun. And sometimes folks have tried to interpret that in the sense, well, really, when you think about it, there isn't anything new. Well, what about computers? What about space travel? Well, the phrase under the sun, and nothing new under the sun, it's not a pronouncement on inventions, but rather it is to say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The human race is the same bunch of sinners it has always been. And nothing we have done really makes a difference. A person is born. Solomon says, you live, you die, and really, you won't be remembered very long. That's true of most people, isn't it? They're only remembered for a few years by those close to them. Even famous people in history sometimes fall into the cracks and are forgotten. The next part of the chapter, verses 12 through 18, here Solomon says everything is meaningless because nothing satisfies. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on the men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Solomon describes what he has experienced. He had tried everything and found that nothing satisfied. Here was a man who, when God said, what do you want me to give you? He said, give me wisdom. And Solomon's wisdom rivaled anyone else in the ancient world. People came from far and wide to see his wisdom. People that don't know a great deal about Scripture have heard how King Solomon dealt with the two women, one of whose baby had died during the night, how he dealt with that situation, and they marvel at it. This great wise man, though, did not find satisfaction in his great wisdom. He even tried foolishness. He did a lot of things that shouldn't be done. He didn't find, of course, satisfaction there. He describes all of this activity like chasing the wind. Our efforts in this fallen world are like trying to catch the wind in our hand. Can you do that? No. Somewhat like children trying to catch bubbles. You blow the bubbles. The children, oh, they're amazed by the bubbles. And they reach out to try to touch the bubble. When they touch the bubble, it disappears. Because of sin, we lived in a messed up world. Verse 15, what is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. On our own efforts, we cannot straighten out the mess that we have in the world. We cannot fix it ourselves. Alistair Begg observed, we are trying to line up the squares on the Rubik's Cube with a couple of colors missing. You can't do that. Solomon says he tried it all. He lived the right way, wisdom, and the wrong way, foolishness. And nothing brought meaning. It was all like trying to grab the wind. You know, basically, there are only two possible conclusions in life. One conclusion says there is no God. Ernest Hemingway said, life is a dirty trick, a short journey from nothingness to nothingness. He was known as a great author, but he took his own life. The other conclusion is that God exists. Tim Keller says that people think Christians are naive. But if your origin is insignificant and your destiny is insignificant, then have the guts to admit that your life is insignificant. You see, Solomon in these first chapters of Ecclesiastes is going to present the very pessimistic picture of life under the sun, of life just from the human perspective, of life where God is not a part. So Solomon describes the meaningless, empty life. But the good news is he will conclude his book with the only way to find meaning. John Willis said of Ecclesiastes, nothing in this world satisfies the deep needs and longings of man, no matter how good and wholesome they are in themselves. And therefore man must look beyond this world to God to find ultimate fulfillment and satisfaction in life. The author looks at various aspects of life, now from an earthly perspective, now from God's perspective. His purpose is to help man see the great limitations of human strength and understanding, in the hope that he will turn to God and trust in his wisdom and power, even when they lie far beyond his comprehension. In my memory, I have run out of gas only twice in my life. And neither time was my fault. That sounds just like a man, doesn't it? Neither time, though, was my fault. One time was not too long, really, after I started driving. And my dad had bought a used car from a woman who lived about 100 miles or so from where we lived. And so as we headed back home, I was driving the new purchase. And I noticed that gas gauge was getting down to the E. Didn't have a cell phone, but somehow or the other I signaled Dad, I'm about out of gas. He said, oh, no, yeah. Well, what he was wanting to do was to make it to a certain town, I think it was Muskogee, Oklahoma, where the gas would be cheaper. This is back in the days when gas was between 20 to 30 cents a gallon. But he wanted to make it to this particular place to get gas. As I recall, we did not make it. And so, got to sit on the side of the road. Dad had to go in and borrow a gas can and get some gas and come back so we could finish the trip. The other time was when a friend said, well, if you will drive your car, I'll buy some gas to put in it. And we made our trip. As we were coming back to Memphis, that gauge was on empty. We didn't make it. do the gas can thing again. There's the expression, running on empty. It has its metaphorical meaning. You've gone beyond your resources, beyond what you can do. Of course, literally, it refers to when it seems the car keeps running even when the gauge indicates it's out of fuel. Of course, in reality, it's not yet out of fuel. Many people are running on empty when it comes to life. Like Solomon, they try all kinds of things to find meaning, but come up empty. Solomon describes the empty life, running on empty. But stay tuned. He's also going to show how to fill it. Shall we stand and sing?